The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss, and Hana Kim stepped into the massive hallway of Nexus 7 Military Academy. The air smelled different here, not like Earth air. It carried strange scents from dozens of alien worlds mixed together. The gravity felt slightly heavier than home, making each step require a little more effort. Around her, creatures from across the galaxy moved through the corridors. Some walked on 2 legs like humans, others on 4, 6, or 8. A few floated in the air using technology she could not understand. Their voices created a symphony of sounds, clicks, whistles, and deep rumbles that no human throat could make. Hannah pulled her small bag closer to her shoulder and followed the signs written in 12 different languages. The human text was always at the bottom, smallest among all the others. She had spent months learning basic galactic standard, but hearing it spoken by native speakers made her realize how much she still needed to learn. The academy stretched out like a small city. Massive windows showed the stars beyond, reminding everyone that they floated in space, far from any planet. Ships came and went from the docking bays below, carrying students and supplies from hundreds of worlds. A tall, thin creature with blue skin and 4 arms approached her. Its voice sounded like musical notes when it spoke. "You must be the human exchange student. I am Assistant Coordinator Vel. Welcome to Nexus 7. "Thank you," Hannah replied, bowing slightly as she would have done on Earth. "I am Hannah Kim. Follow me. I will show you to your quarters and explain the basic rules." Vel moved gracefully down the corridor, its 4 arms gesturing as it talked. "You are the first human to study here. Many are curious about your species." They passed groups of students gathered around holographic displays showing star maps and battle formations. The students looked up as Hannah walked by, their alien eyes studying her with obvious interest. Some whispered to each other in languages she did not recognize. "Do not mind them," Vel said, noticing her discomfort. "Humans are still new to the galactic community. Most have never seen one of your kind before." Her room was small but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and viewing port that looked out at the stars. Vel handed her a tablet device and explained how to access class schedules, meal times, and academy rules. "Classes begin tomorrow morning. You will start with Advanced Tactical Studies under Professor Krell." After Vel left, Hannah sat on her bed and looked out at space. Earth was somewhere out there, so far away she could not even see which star was her sun. She had worked hard for this chance, studying alien languages and military history for 3 years. The academy only accepted the best students from each world, and she was the first human they had ever chosen. But now, surrounded by beings who had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, she wondered if she really belonged here. The next morning, Hannah found her way to the Advanced Tactical Studies classroom. It was a large, circular room with seats arranged in rising rows around a central display area. Students were already filling the seats, their various body shapes requiring different types of chairs and supports. She chose a seat in the back row, hoping to observe before having to participate. The other students paid little attention to her as they talked among themselves about previous battles and famous commanders from their homeworlds. Professor Krell entered the room, and all conversation stopped. The professor was unlike anything Hannah had ever seen. Its body resembled a giant insect with 6 legs and a hard shell covering. Multiple eyes moved independently on its head, allowing it to look at several students at once. When it spoke, its voice buzzed like a swarm of bees. "Welcome to Advanced Tactical Studies," Professor Krell announced. "This course will challenge everything you think you know about warfare. You will study not just individual battles, but entire campaigns lasting years or decades." The central display activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of star systems. Red and blue dots marked the positions of fleets, while lines showed their movements over time. "Today we begin with the Centauri conflict," Professor Krell continued. "This war lasted 6 standard years and involved 47 different species across 18 star systems. It remains the most complex military campaign in recorded galactic history." A student in the front row raised one of his 4 arms. Hannah recognized him from the corridors. Cadet Zoth, a member of the Craxian species known for their strategic thinking. His red skin gleamed under the classroom lights and his yellow eyes held confidence. "Professor, my people have studied this conflict extensively," Zoth said. "The Craxian Military Institute considers it a perfect example of how superior planning defeats raw numbers." "An interesting perspective, Cadet Zoth," Professor Krell replied. "Perhaps you can explain why the conflict lasted 6 years when most military historians believe it should have ended in 2. Zoth's confidence faltered slightly. "Well, there were unexpected complications. Supply line disruptions, communication delays between allied fleets, political interference from neutral systems. All valid points," the professor agreed. "But you are describing symptoms, not causes. The true reason this war lasted so long remains one of the great mysteries in military science." Another student, a tall, gray-skinned being with large black eyes, spoke up. "My species fought in that conflict. The problem was too many different commanders with different strategies. No unified vision. Also correct, but still incomplete," Professor Krell said. Its multiple eyes scanned the room, briefly focusing on Hannah in the back row before moving on. "This semester you will analyze every major engagement of the Centauri conflict. All 847 hours of recorded battles." The students murmured in surprise. Even for advanced cadets, this was an enormous amount of material to study. "Your final assignment will be to identify the single most critical mistake that prolonged the war," Professor Krell announced. "The student who provides the most complete analysis will receive direct admission to the Strategic Command Program." Zoth leaned back in his chair, smiling. The Strategic Command Program was the most prestigious military school in the galaxy. Only 10 students were accepted each year from thousands of applicants. "This is impossible for lesser species," he whispered to the student beside him, loud enough for others to hear. "Strategic thinking requires advanced neural development. My people have been breeding for intelligence for 10,000 years. Other students nodded in agreement. The Craxians were famous throughout the galaxy for their military genius. Their commanders had won more battles than any other species. Hannah listened to their conversations but said nothing. She opened her tablet and began taking notes as Professor Krell explained the first battle of the conflict. The other students debated tactics and second-guessed the decisions made by long-dead commanders. The human fleet would have surrendered after the first engagement, Zoth commented during a discussion about Earth's minor role in the war. Humans lack the mental capacity for extended strategic thinking, a few students laughed. Hannah felt her cheeks grow warm, but she continued writing in her tablet without looking up. She had heard similar comments throughout her life, from her own species as well as others. Humans were considered primitive by galactic standards, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. But as she listened to the details of each battle, something began forming in her mind. The other students saw each engagement as separate events, but Hannah began to see patterns connecting them all. The movements of fleets, the timing of attacks, the allocation of resources, everything was connected in ways that seemed invisible to her classmates. She filled page after page with notes, diagrams, and questions. While the other students focused on individual tactics, she began mapping the entire conflict as a single, living entity. Every decision had consequences that rippled through time, affecting battles that would not happen for months or years. Professor Krell dismissed the class. After 2 hours, the students gathered their belongings and left in small groups, still discussing the material. Hannah packed her tablet slowly, thinking about everything she had heard. "The human stays quiet," she heard Zoth say to his friends as they walked past. Her row, "Smart choice. Better to stay silent than reveal your ignorance." They laughed as they left the classroom. Hannah waited until she was alone before standing up. She looked down at the central display, now showing a frozen image of 2 fleets facing each other across empty space. 847 hours of recorded battles. The other students saw it as an impossible challenge. But as Hannah walked back to her room, Her human mind was already beginning to process the information in ways her alien classmates could never imagine. She had a lot of work to do. 3 weeks passed since Hannah's first day at the academy. Each morning, she walked to Professor Krell's classroom and took her usual seat in the back row. The routine had become familiar: arrive early, sit quietly, listen to her classmates debate military strategies from the Centauri conflict. The other students had formed their social groups quickly. The Craxians, led by Zoth, dominated most discussions with their confident voices and aggressive gestures. The tall Valdorians preferred analyzing supply chain logistics, while the blue-skinned Helix focused on communication systems between fleets. Hannah remained an outsider to all these groups. Today we examine the Battle of Kepler 442. Professor Krell announced as holographic displays showed two massive fleets approaching each other. This engagement lasted 37 hours and involved over 2,000 ships from both sides. Zoth raised his hand immediately. Professor, this battle demonstrates the importance of superior firepower. The Alliance fleet had more ships but weaker weapons. They should have retreated when they realized they were outgunned. An interesting view, Professor Krell replied. What do others think? A Valdorian student named Kex spoke up. The Alliance commanders made the correct choice to fight. Their supply lines were shorter, so they could replace losses faster than the enemy. But they lost 60% of their fleet, argued another student. No strategic advantage is worth such casualties. The debate continued for 20 minutes. Students from different species offered perspectives based on their own military traditions. Some valued aggressive tactics, others preferred defensive strategies. A few focused entirely on economic factors. Hannah listened and took notes. Her tablet screen filled with diagrams showing fleet movements, weapon ranges, and casualty reports. But while her classmates argued about the decisions made during the battle, she found herself wondering about the decisions made before it started. Why had the Alliance fleet chosen to fight at Kepler 442 instead of the neighboring Kepler 438 system? The star chart showed that Kepler 438 had better defensive positions and asteroid fields that could provide cover. Something had forced the Alliance to fight in the worst possible location. She made notes about this question but did not speak. Up during the discussion, after class, Professor Krell announced the next assignment. You will work in groups of 4 to analyze the Battle of Kepler 442 in detail. Each group must identify the 3 most critical decisions made by either side and explain how different choices might have changed the outcome. Students immediately began forming groups. The Craxians stayed together, as did most other species. Hannah waited as the classroom emptied, hoping someone would invite her to join their team. Human, Zoth called out as he gathered his materials. You can work with us if you want. We need someone to handle data entry and basic research. 3 other Craxian students stood with him: Vex, Neil, and Tors. They were among the top students in the class, known for their analytical skills and competitive nature. Thank you, Hannah said, grateful for the invitation even if it came with an obvious insult. Good, Zoth replied. We will meet in study room 7 tomorrow evening. Bring your tablet and be prepared to work hard. The next evening, Hannah arrived at the study room 5 minutes early. She had spent the day reviewing all available data about the Battle of Kepler 442, taking detailed notes on fleet compositions, weapon types, and battle sequences. The Craxians arrived together, carrying multiple tablets and portable displays. They quickly set up their equipment and began discussing their analysis approach. The key issue was tactical positioning, Zoth declared. The Alliance fleet entered the system at the wrong vector. If they had approached from the opposite direction, they could have used the planet's gravity well for protection. Agreed, sighed Vex, but they also deployed their heavy cruisers incorrectly. Keeping them in the rear was a waste of their firepower advantage. Nail and Tors nodded, adding their own observations about shield configurations and communication delays. Hannah waited for a chance to contribute. After 10 minutes of discussion, Zoth finally acknowledged her presence. Human, We need you to compile the casualty lists for both fleets. Also, create a timeline showing when each ship was destroyed or disabled. Make sure the data is accurate. We cannot afford mistakes. Of course, Hannah replied. She opened her tablet and began working while the others continued their strategic analysis. As she organized the casualty data, Hannah noticed something interesting. The Alliance losses were not random. Ships from certain sectors of their formation were destroyed at much higher rates than others. The pattern suggested that the enemy had focused their attacks based on specific intelligence about Alliance fleet. Composition. She created a visual map showing the destruction patterns and was about to mention it when Zoth spoke again. Human, when you finish the casualty lists, we need you to check the supply manifests for both fleets. Find out what resources each side brought to the battle. Hannah nodded and returned to her work. The supply data revealed another interesting pattern. The Alliance fleet carried enough ammunition for a battle lasting up to 50 hours, but they had supplies for only 30 hours of combat. This suggested they planned for a quick victory or expected reinforcements that never arrived. Again, she considered sharing this observation but decided against it. When she saw how focused the Craxians were on their own analysis for 3 hours, Hannah compiled data while her teammates debated tactical theories. They assigned her task after task, checking weapon specifications, verifying star charts, organizing communication logs. None of the work required creative thinking, just careful attention to detail. This should be enough for tonight, Zoth finally announced. Human, send us all the data you compiled. We will review it and prepare our final analysis. What about my observations? Hannah asked. I noticed some patterns in the casualty data and supply manifests that might be important. The 4 Craxians exchanged glances. Vex smiled in what Hannah had learned was their version of politeness. We appreciate your effort, Vex said. But pattern recognition requires advanced strategic training. It is better if you focus on data collection while we handle the analysis. Hannah felt her cheeks grow warm. I understand. I will send you the files tonight. She packed her tablet and left the study room. In the corridors, she passed other study groups working late. Students from different species collaborated on projects, sharing ideas and debating strategies. But none of the groups included humans. She was the only one at the academy. Back in her room, Hannah sat at her desk and looked out at the stars. She opened a communication channel to Earth and waited for the connection to establish. After several minutes, a familiar face appeared on her screen. Hannah! Gino Park smiled broadly. How is life among the aliens? Gino had been her closest friend since childhood. He now worked as a military analyst for Earth's Space Defense Force, helping to prepare humanity for larger roles in galactic affairs. Challenging, Hannah admitted. The coursework is fascinating, but I feel like an outsider. My classmates treat me like a research assistant rather than an equal. That sounds frustrating, Gino said. Are they giving you a chance to show what you can do? Hannah described her experiences with the group project, and how her teammates dismissed her observations without even examining them. They are making a mistake, Gino said firmly. I have seen your work. You see connections that other people miss. Remember your analysis of the Mars defense exercises? You predicted the outcome 3 days before the simulation ended? That was different, Hannah replied. Those were human military exercises using human strategies. This is galactic-level warfare involving dozens of alien species with completely different approaches to combat. The principles are the same, Gino insisted. War is about patterns, resources, and psychology. Those things work the same way whether the soldiers are human or alien. After their conversation ended, Hannah returned to her notes about the battle of Kepler 442. She had found 3 significant patterns that her teammates ignored, all pointing to the same conclusion. The battle was lost before the first shot was fired. The Alliance fleet had been manipulated into fighting at the worst possible location, with insufficient supplies, using a formation that maximized their casualties. Someone on the enemy side had planned everything perfectly, knowing exactly how the Alliance commanders would respond to each situation, but proving this theory would require analyzing hundreds of other battles to show how the same manipulation tactics were used throughout the war. It was the kind of comprehensive analysis that would take months to complete. Hannah smiled as she opened a new file on her tablet. She had plenty of time, and unlike her classmates, she enjoyed looking for patterns that others could not see. The Battle of Kepler 442 was just the beginning. The Academy's night cycle brought artificial darkness to the corridors, but Hannah's room glowed softly from her tablet screen. While her classmates slept, she worked through her fifth consecutive night analyzing battle data from the Centauri conflict. Empty food containers sat stacked on her desk beside cups of cold stimulant drinks. Her eyes burned from staring at tactical displays, but her mind felt more awake than ever. What had started as curiosity about the Battle of Kepler 442 had grown into something much larger. She was no longer just studying individual battles. She was reconstructing the entire 6-year war in her head. The tablet screen showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy with thousands of colored dots representing fleet movements over time. Red lines marked alliance forces, blue lines showed enemy positions, and yellow indicated neutral ships. As Hannah adjusted the timeline controls, the dots moved like living creatures across the star map. Most students would see chaos in such a display. Too much information, too many variables, too many moving parts to track. But Hannah's human brain processed the information differently. Where her alien classmates saw separate battles, she saw patterns flowing from one engagement to the next. She paused the display at the Battle of Ross 128, which happened 8 months after Kepler 442. The Alliance fleet had made another tactical mistake, choosing to fight in open space instead of near the system's asteroid belt. Just like at Kepler 442, they fought in the worst possible location. Hannah rewound the timeline and watched the events leading up to both battles. In each case, enemy scout ships had been detected near better defensive positions days before the main battle. The Alliance commanders had moved their fleets away from these positions to avoid what they thought were traps. But what if the scout ships were meant to be detected? What if the enemy wanted the Alliance to avoid the better positions? She opened a new file and began mapping what she called manipulation points, moments when the enemy appeared to make mistakes that actually benefited them later. The pattern appeared in battle after battle. Fake retreats that drew Alliance fleets into bad positions. Supply convoys that were accidentally discovered, leading Alliance forces away from strategic targets. Communications that were intercepted but contained false information. Her tablet chimed softly, indicating an incoming message. She opened it to find the group assignment analysis from Zoth and his teammates. The Battle of Kepler 442 resulted from poor Alliance tactical planning, the report began. The Alliance commanders failed to utilize proper fleet formations and ignored basic principles of space combat. Hannah read through their analysis with growing frustration. Her teammates had focused entirely on the 37 hours of actual fighting while ignoring the weeks of preparation that made the battle outcome inevitable. They described symptoms without understanding the disease. She closed their report and returned to her own work. By dawn, she had mapped 43 battles and identified manipulation points in 38 of them. The enemy had not just won through superior firepower or tactics. They had controlled the Alliance decision-making process from the beginning of the war. The next morning in class, Professor Krell reviewed several student analyses of the battle. Of Kepler 442, Zoth presented his group's work with typical confidence, describing Alliance tactical failures and recommending alternative battle formations. A thorough analysis of the engagement itself, Professor Krell commented. But you focus only on the battle, not the campaign. War is not decided by individual fights, but by the connections between them. Zoth's confidence flickered slightly. We examined the battle in complete detail, Professor. The Alliance made 17 specific tactical errors during the engagement. True, Professor Krell agreed. But why did they make those errors? Were the Alliance commanders simply incompetent? Or were there other factors influencing their decisions? The classroom fell silent. Students exchanged uncertain glances, realizing they had missed something important in their analyses. Hannah raised her hand slowly. The other students turned to look at her in surprise. She had never spoken during class discussions before. Yes, Miss Kim? Professor Krell's multiple eyes focused on her. The Alliance commanders were not incompetent, Hannah said quietly. They were manipulated into fighting at Kepler 442 instead of Kepler 438, where they would have had better defensive positions. Zoth laughed. That is ridiculous. No one can manipulate entire fleets into fighting where they do not want to fight. It is possible if you control the information they receive, Hannah continued. Enemy scout ships were detected near Kepler 438 3 days before the battle. The Alliance moved away to avoid what they thought was a trap. Even if that were true, Zoth said dismissively, it would be impossible to prove. You would need to analyze dozens of other battles to show a pattern. Hannah looked directly at him. I have analyzed 112 battles from the conflict. The manipulation pattern appears in 87 of them. The classroom went completely quiet. Even Professor Krell's movements stopped. That is impossible, Zoth said. We have only studied 12 battles in class. No student could analyze one? 112 battles in 3 weeks. I work at night, Hannah replied simply. Professor Krell moved closer to Hannah's seat. Miss Kim, are you claiming to have studied the majority of the Centauri conflict on your own? Not just studied, Hannah said. I have reconstructed the entire war in timeline form, tracking fleet movements, supply chains, communication patterns, and decision-making processes for all major engagements. Several students made sounds of disbelief. The Valdorian student Keck spoke up. Professor, this is clearly impossible. The complete Centauri database contains over 40,000 hours of recorded material. No individual could process that much information. Most of it is irrelevant, Hannah explained. Routine communications, supply inventories, maintenance records. The important data, battle records, command decisions, fleet movements, represents only about 2,000 hours of material. Only 2,000 hours? Zoth's voice rose. That is still far beyond what any student could analyze in 3 weeks. Hannah opened her tablet and projected her work onto the classroom's main display. The three-dimensional galaxy map appeared, showing the complete 6-year timeline of the Centauri conflict. Thousands of colored dots moved across the star systems, representing every major fleet movement during the war. The students stared in amazement. Even Professor Krell's multiple eyes all focused on the display. This is my reconstruction of the conflict, Hannah said. Each dot represents a fleet or task force. The red lines show actual movements, while the blue lines show projected movements based on original plans. The yellow markers indicate manipulation points where enemy actions influenced alliance decisions. She adjusted the timeline controls, and the display showed how enemy fleets consistently maneuvered to deny the alliance their preferred battle locations. Fake retreats, false intelligence, and carefully timed raids all worked together to control where and when major battles occurred. The enemy did not just fight the war, Hannah continued. They choreographed it. Every major alliance defeat was the result of fighting at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong information. The classroom remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Professor Krell spoke. Miss Kim, how long did this analysis take you? Approximately 160 hours over the past 3 weeks, Hannah replied. I sleep about 4 hours each night. Zoth shook his head. This proves nothing. Creating pretty graphics does not constitute real strategic analysis. Then test it, Hannah said calmly. Give me any battle from the conflict, and I will predict the outcome based on the pre-battle manipulation patterns. Professor Krell's buzzing voice carried a note of interest. Very well. The Battle of Vol 359, the Alliance had superior numbers and better positioning. Most military historians consider their defeat a mystery. Hannah adjusted her display to show the Vol 359 system. 3 weeks before the battle, enemy raiders attacked Alliance supply depots in the neighboring systems. The Alliance reinforced. those depots by transferring ships from Vault 359. When the main enemy fleet arrived, the Alliance no longer had numerical superiority. She highlighted the timeline showing how the supply depot raids were perfectly timed to weaken Vault 359's defenses just before the enemy attack. The raids were not random attacks on targets of opportunity, Hannah explained. They were surgical strikes designed to manipulate Alliance fleet deployment. The enemy sacrificed minor tactical advantages to gain a major strategic victory. Professor Krell studied the display carefully. Fascinating. And you believe this pattern explains the length of the entire conflict? Yes, Hannah said. The enemy could have won the war in 2 years with conventional tactics. But by manipulating Alliance decisions, they extended the conflict to 6 years while ensuring their own victory remained certain. They turned the war into a learning exercise for their commanders. The bell chimed, indicating the end of class. Students gathered their materials slowly, still staring at Hannah's display. Many whispered to each other as they left the room. Zoff paused at Hannah's desk. Impressive graphics, he said coldly. But real strategic analysis requires more than finding patterns in old data. Professor Krell's office was unlike any room Hannah had seen at the academy. The walls curved inward like the inside of an egg, covered with displays showing battles from across galactic history. Ancient weapons hung in glass cases next to holographic recreations of famous commanders giving speeches to their troops. Sit wherever you are comfortable, Professor Krell said, gesturing with one of its 6 legs toward several different types of chairs designed for various alien body shapes. Hannah chose a simple human-style chair and waited while the professor reviewed her analysis files on a large display screen. Remarkable work, Professor Krell finally said. I have been studying the Centauri conflict for 20 years, and I never considered the possibility of such extensive manipulation. Your pattern recognition is quite impressive. Thank you, Professor, Hannah replied. But I know my classmates think I'm just finding patterns that do not really exist. A valid concern, Professor Krell agreed. Pattern recognition can lead to false conclusions if not properly tested. That is why I'm going to give you a chance to prove your theories. The professor manipulated the display controls and 3 new battle scenarios appeared. Each showed incomplete data from major engagements during the Centauri conflict. These are the midterm examination questions, Professor Krell explained. Students must predict the outcomes of these 3 battles based on the initial conditions. Most will spend days analyzing the data and still produce uncertain conclusions. Hannah studied the displays. The first battle showed 2 fleets approaching each other near a gas giant. The second depicted a siege scenario around a heavily fortified space station. The third involved a complex 3-way engagement between Alliance forces, enemy fleets, and neutral traders caught in the middle. How long do I have to complete the analysis? She asked. The examination is scheduled for next week, Professor Krell said. Students will have 4 hours to submit their predictions and explanations. Hannah nodded, already seeing the patterns in the initial data. If her manipulation theory was correct, the outcomes should be predictable based on the pre-battle positioning and information flow. Professor, may I ask you something? She said, why did you really invite me to study here? Humans have been part of the galactic community for only 50 years. We have no major military victories, no famous strategic traditions. Why choose me over thousands of other applicants? Professor Krell's multiple eyes focused on her with what she had learned was intense concentration. Because your species thinks differently than ours. For 10,000 years, galactic military science has been dominated by a few major species. Craxians, Valdorians, Helix, they all approach strategy the same way, using logic trees and probability calculations. The professor activated another display showing brain scan comparisons between different species. Human brains work differently, it continued. Your neural pathways form connections that our species consider random or chaotic. But chaos theory suggests that apparent randomness often contains hidden patterns. Perhaps human minds can see patterns that we cannot. Or perhaps we see patterns that do not exist, Hannah said. True, Professor Krell agreed. That is what we need to determine. Your analysis of the Centauri conflict is either brilliant strategic insight or elaborate self-deception. The midterm examination will help us discover which. The next week passed quickly. Hannah continued attending classes while refining her analysis of the 3 examination battles. Her classmates formed study groups and spent long hours debating possible outcomes. Most focused on tactical considerations, weapon ranges, shield, strengths, numerical advantages. Hannah took a different approach. She traced the events leading up to each battle, looking for manipulation points that would have influenced commander decisions. The patterns were subtle but consistent with her larger theory about the conflict. On examination day, students filed into a large testing chamber filled with individual workstations. Each station had access to the same battle data and analysis. Tools. Professor Krell announced the rules and activated the 4-hour timer. Most students immediately began running computer simulations and calculating probability models. The room filled with the soft sounds of tablets, processing data and styluses scratching across screens. Hannah opened the first battle, CENARIO, and read through the initial conditions. 2 fleets of roughly equal strength approaching a gas giant. The Alliance fleet had slightly better weapons, but the enemy had superior speed and maneuverability. She traced backward from the battle location, examining the events of the previous weeks. The Alliance fleet had originally planned to attack a different system but received intelligence about enemy reinforcements heading there. They diverted to the gas giant system instead, but, according to her manipulation pattern analysis, that intelligence was probably false. The enemy reinforcements were most likely fictional, designed to draw the Alliance fleet to a less favorable battle location. She spent 15 minutes analyzing the scenario before writing her prediction. The enemy fleet would win decisively, using the gas giant's gravity, while to slingshot around the planet and attack the Alliance from an unexpected angle. The second scenario took longer. A siege situation around a fortified space station looked like a straightforward defensive advantage for the station occupants. But Hannah noticed that the attacking fleet had arrived exactly when the station's supply convoy was delayed by pirates in a neighboring system. Without those supplies, the station's defenders would run out of ammunition before reinforcements could arrive. Another manipulation, another predetermined outcome. For the third scenario, she examined the 3-way battle between Alliance, enemy, and neutral forces. Most students would probably focus on the military aspects, but Hannah paid attention to the neutral traders. Their cargo manifest showed they were carrying medical supplies to a plague-affected world. The Alliance commanders would not risk civilian casualties by fighting near the neutral convoy. This moral consideration would limit their tactical options and allow the enemy to dictate the terms of engagement. She completed all 3 predictions in 37 minutes, then spent another hour double-checking her work. The other students were still running calculations and debating tactical alternatives. When time expired, Professor Krell collected the tablets and announced that results would be available the following day. Students filed out of the testing chamber looking exhausted and uncertain. Zoth approached Hannah as she packed her materials. 37 minutes? He said mockingly. Either you are a strategic genius or you gave up and guessed randomly. I use the same analytical methods I showed in class, Hannah replied calmly. Those pretty graphics prove nothing, Zoth said. Real strategic analysis requires deep mathematical modeling and extensive computational support. Humans lack the mental capacity for such complex reasoning. Other students gathered around to listen. Hannah felt their eyes on her, some curious, others dismissive. We will see tomorrow, she said simply. That evening, Hannah video called Gino on Earth. She told him about the examination and her growing confidence in the manipulation theory. How certain are you about your predictions? Gino asked. Very certain, Hannah replied. The patterns are too consistent to be coincidence. If I am right about the manipulation theory, the outcomes should be exactly as I predicted. And if you are wrong? Hannah considered the question. If her predictions were incorrect, it would prove that human pattern recognition was just wishful thinking. She would lose credibility with her professors and classmates. Worse, it might damage humanity's reputation in the galactic community. Then I will learn from my mistakes and try a different approach, she said finally, the next morning. Professor Krell entered the classroom carrying a tablet with the examination results. The room fell silent as students waited to hear how they had performed. The 3 battle scenarios were taken from actual historical engagements, Professor Krell announced. Each battle had a definitive outcome recorded in military archives. I will now reveal how accurately each student predicted these outcomes. The professor activated the main display, showing the correct results for all 3 battles. The first battle had ended in complete enemy victory, with the Alliance fleet destroyed using exactly the gravitational slingshot maneuver Hannah had predicted. The second siege had ended when the space station ran out of ammunition after 19 hours, forcing surrender to the attacking fleet. The third battle had resulted in enemy victory after Alliance forces refused to engage near the neutral medical convoy, allowing the enemy to choose the optimal engagement range. Most students correctly predicted the first battle outcome, Professor Krell continued. About half correctly predicted the siege result. Only one student correctly predicted all 3 outcomes and accurately described the tactical methods used. In each engagement, Hannah felt her heart racing as the professor's multiple eyes turned toward her. Miss Kim, your predictions were not only correct, but included details about secondary effects and long-term consequences that were not part of the original questions. You correctly identified the psychological factors affecting Alliance commanders, and even predicted civilian casualty numbers for the third engagement. The classroom erupted in whispers and surprised exclamations. Zoth stared at Hannah with an expression she could not read. Furthermore, Professor Krell continued, Miss Kim's explanations demonstrate understanding of strategic principles that most graduate-level students struggle to grasp. Her analysis goes beyond tactical considerations to examine the psychological and political factors that influenced command decisions. Hannah felt overwhelmed by the attention. She had hoped to prove her theories, but she had not expected such complete validation. However, Professor Krell said, raising one leg for silence, correct predictions based on historical data do not necessarily prove the broader manipulation theory. To truly test Miss Kim's strategic insights, we need a more comprehensive challenge. The professor's buzzing voice carried a note of excitement. Therefore, I am proposing a special examination. Miss Kim will be given access to the complete Centauri conflict database and asked to identify the single most critical mistake that prolonged the war from 2 years to 6 years. The classroom fell completely silent. This was the ultimate challenge that Professor Krell had mentioned at the beginning of the semester, the question that had puzzled military historians for decades. Miss Kim, Professor Krell said, do you accept this challenge? Hannah looked around the room at her classmates. Some appeared skeptical, others curious. Zoth's expression had changed from mockery to something that looked like concern. She thought about everything she had learned in the past month. The manipulation patterns, the strategic choreography, the way the enemy had controlled Alliance decision-making throughout the conflict. Yes, Professor, she said. I accept. The die was cast. In 1 week, she would either prove that human strategic thinking could solve the galaxy's greatest military mystery, or fail spectacularly in front of everyone who mattered to her future career. Either way, there was no turning back now. Admiral Vex stood in the center of the Academy's main simulation chamber, its reptilian features unreadable as it watched technicians prepare the most advanced analysis equipment available. The chamber was normally used for training senior officers, but today it would host a single human student, attempting to solve the galaxy's greatest strategic mystery. Hannah entered the chamber carrying only her tablet and a small bag containing energy bars and water. The curved walls stretched up 30 meters above her head, covered with displays that could show star maps, battle formations, and tactical data from any conflict in recorded galactic history. Miss Kim, Admiral Vex said in its deep, measured voice, Professor Krell has informed me of your unusual request for complete access to the Centauri database. This is highly irregular. Graduate students typically spend years studying portions of this information. I understand, Admiral, Hannah replied. But I believe the answer requires examining the entire conflict as a single connected event, not just individual battles. Admiral Vex nodded slowly. You have been granted 6 days to complete your analysis. The Academy's full computational resources are at your disposal. However, I must warn you, failure will not only affect your academic standing but could damage relations between the Academy and your homeworld. The weight of that statement settled on Hannah's shoulders. She represented not just herself but all of humanity. If she failed, it might be decades before another human was accepted at the Academy. I understand the responsibility, Admiral, she said. Good, Admiral Vex replied. Professor Krell will monitor your progress and ensure you have everything needed. The simulation chamber will be sealed during your work period. No outside communication will be permitted. The Admiral left, and the chamber doors sealed with a soft hiss. Hannah was alone with the most advanced military analysis equipment in the galaxy and 6 days to prove her theories. She began by uploading her existing analysis to the chamber's main computers. Her 3-dimensional timeline of the conflict appeared on the surrounding displays, filling the chamber with moving dots of light representing thousands of ships across hundreds of star systems for the first day. She expanded her manipulation pattern analysis to include every recorded engagement in the database. Minor skirmishes, supply raids, diplomatic incidents, everything that had influenced the course of the war. The chamber's computers processed data at speeds no human mind could match, but Hannah's brain made connections the computers missed. The manipulation patterns were even more extensive than she had realized. The enemy had not just controlled major battle locations, they had influenced alliance politics, economic decisions, and military appointments. Every aspect of the war had been choreographed to achieve specific outcomes, but why? Why extend a war that could have been won quickly? On the second day, she focused on the enemy leadership structure. The database contained intercepted communications, captured battle plans, and post-war interrogation records. Most analysts had studied these documents for tactical intelligence, but Hannah looked for patterns in decision-making processes. She discovered that enemy strategy had changed dramatically 18 months into the conflict. Early battles showed conventional tactics focused on quick victory. Later engagements demonstrated the sophisticated manipulation patterns that had puzzled historians for decades. Something had happened 18 months into the war that changed everything. The third day brought a breakthrough. Hidden in routine supply records, Hannah found evidence of a massive enemy training program that began exactly 18 months after the war started. Thousands of junior officers were rotated through combat positions, gaining experience in real battles against real opponents. The enemy had not been trying to win the war quickly. They had been using it as the ultimate training exercise. This revelation explained everything. The manipulation patterns, the extended timeline, the seemingly irrational enemy decisions that actually served long-term strategic goals, the Centauri. Conflict had been the enemy's military academy, and the Alliance forces had been unwilling training partners, but proving this theory required identifying the specific moment when enemy strategy shifted from conquest to education. Hannah spent the 4th and 5th days analyzing thousands of battle records. Looking for the precise turning point. She found it in an obscure engagement at the edge of the conflict zone. The Battle of Proxima Centauri had lasted only 6 hours and involved fewer than 200 ships. Most historians ignored it as a minor skirmish, but Hannah recognized it as the most important battle of the entire war. At Proxima Centauri, the enemy had achieved perfect victory conditions. The Alliance fleet was trapped, outgunned, and facing certain destruction. Any rational commander would have finished them quickly. Instead, the enemy had withdrawn, allowing the Alliance fleet to escape and continue fighting. This was the moment when the war's purpose changed. The enemy leadership had made a deliberate choice to prolong the conflict for training purposes. Every battle after Proxima Centauri had been designed not to end the war but to provide education for enemy officers. On the sixth day, Hana prepared her final presentation. She created a comprehensive analysis showing how the enemy had transformed a conventional conquest into a controlled learning environment. The presentation included timeline charts, strategic diagrams, and detailed explanations of the psychological and political factors that made the manipulation possible. As she worked, she thought about her conversation with Gino weeks earlier. He had been right. The principles of war were the same regardless of species. Human intuition about psychology and deception applied just as well to alien conflicts. When the chamber doors opened, Professor Krell entered, followed by Admiral Vex and several other senior Academy officials. Word of Hana's challenge had spread throughout the station, and everyone wanted to see if a human student could solve the mystery that had puzzled the galaxy's best military minds. "Are you ready to present your findings, Miss Kim?" Professor Krell asked. "Yes, Professor," Hana replied, activating the main display system. The chamber filled with her analysis. 6 years of war compressed into visual patterns that told the story of the greatest strategic deception in galactic history. The officials studied the displays with growing amazement as Hana explained her discovery. The enemy never intended to win the war quickly, she concluded. The Centauri conflict was the most sophisticated training program ever created, disguised as a conventional military campaign. Every major battle after Proxima Centauri was designed to provide educational experiences for enemy commanders while maintaining the illusion of genuine warfare. Admiral Vex stepped forward, its reptilian eyes reflecting the light from the displays. "This is a remarkable theory, Miss Kim, but it raises troubling questions about our understanding of military history. If your analysis is correct, it means the Alliance forces were manipulated for over 4 years without realizing it." "Yes, Admiral," Hana agreed. "The enemy's strategic patience was their greatest weapon. They sacrificed short-term tactical advantages to achieve long-term strategic goals that we did not even recognize existed." Professor Krell's multiple eyes all focused on different aspects of the presentation simultaneously. "Your analysis suggests that the enemy was fighting a completely different war than the Alliance realized. While Alliance commanders focused on territorial control and resource acquisition, the enemy was optimizing for officer training and strategic experimentation." "Exactly," Hana said. "The Alliance was playing chess while the enemy was running a university." The chamber fell silent as the officials absorbed the implications of her theory. If she was correct, it would revolutionize understanding of long-term strategic planning and force military academies across the galaxy to reconsider their approaches to warfare. Finally, Admiral Vex spoke. "Miss Kim, your analysis is unprecedented in its scope and implications. However, such extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. We will need time to verify your conclusions against classified records and consult with other military historians." "I understand, Admiral," Hana replied. "In the meantime," Professor Krell added, "your work has already demonstrated capabilities that warrant recognition. Regardless of whether your ultimate conclusions prove correct, you have shown strategic thinking abilities that exceed graduate-level standards." As the officials left to begin their verification process, Hana remained alone in the simulation chamber. The display still showed her analysis of the Centauri conflict. 6 years of war reduced to patterns of light and data. She had done everything she could. Now she could only wait to see whether her human perspective on an alien war would be accepted by the galactic military establishment. Outside the chamber windows, stars wheeled slowly in their courses, indifferent to the struggles of the beings who fought among them. But for the first time since arriving at the Academy, Hana felt that she truly belonged among those stars. She had found her place in the galaxy, not through conquest or dominance but through understanding. The quiet human girl who sat in the back row had finally found her voice. The Academy's main auditorium had never hosted an event quite like this one. Representatives from 12 different species filled the curved seating rows, while holographic displays showed military officials participating from distant star systems. Word of the human students' analysis had spread throughout the galactic military community, drawing attention from the highest levels of command. Hannah stood at the center of the auditorium floor, surrounded by the advanced projection equipment that would display her findings to the assembled audience. She wore the formal academy uniform for the first time, its silver insignia reflecting the lights from overhead. Admiral Vex approached the central podium, its commanding presence bringing immediate silence to the auditorium. Distinguished colleagues, we gather today to hear the results of an unprecedented analysis. Student Hannah Kim has spent the past month examining the Centauri conflict in its entirety, attempting to answer the question that has puzzled military historians for decades. The Admiral gestured toward Hannah. In 6 days of intensive analysis, Miss Kim developed a theory that challenges our fundamental understanding of the longest war in recorded galactic history. Her conclusions have been verified by our senior staff and corroborated with classified intelligence archives. Hannah activated her presentation, and the auditorium filled with the three-dimensional timeline she had created. 6 years of conflict appeared as flowing streams of light, showing fleet movements, battles, and strategic decisions across multiple star systems. The Centauri conflict lasted 6 years, Hannah began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's acoustics. Most analysts have focused on why it could not be ended sooner. I asked a different question. What if it was never meant to end quickly? She highlighted specific battles on the timeline, showing how enemy tactics had evolved throughout the war. 18 months into the conflict, enemy strategy changed completely. Instead of seeking decisive victories, they began implementing what I call controlled educational warfare. The display zoomed in on the Battle of Proxima Centauri. This engagement represents the turning point. Enemy forces achieved perfect victory conditions but chose to withdraw, allowing Alliance forces to escape and continue fighting. This was not mercy or tactical error. It was the moment when conquest became curriculum. Murmurs rippled through the audience as military officers realized the implications. If Hannah was correct, the enemy had deliberately prolonged the war for purposes no one had considered. Over the following 4 years, enemy commanders systematically rotated junior officers through combat positions, Hannah continued. Each major battle provided specific learning experiences: fleet coordination, supply chain management, multi-species command structure, psychological warfare techniques. She showed detailed charts mapping enemy officer rotations and their correlation with different types of engagements. The Alliance forces became unwilling training partners in the most sophisticated military education program ever created. Admiral Vex stepped forward. Miss Kim, your analysis suggests that thousands of Alliance personnel died to provide education for enemy officers. This has profound implications for our understanding of military ethics and strategic planning. Yes, Admiral, Hannah agreed. But it also explains why the enemy became such effective commanders in subsequent conflicts. They gained 4 years of practical experience against real opponents under controlled conditions. The Centauri conflict was their graduate school. Professor Krell activated a supplementary display showing post-war career records. Our verification confirms Miss Kim's analysis. Enemy officers who participated in the extended conflict achieved promotion rates 70% higher than their peers. They became the core leadership for the next generation of military commanders. The auditorium buzzed with excited discussion as officers recognized the revolutionary implications of this discovery. Strategic planning would need to account for opponents who might sacrifice short-term advantages for long-term educational benefits. Cadet Zoth stood up in the audience, his red skin darker than usual with what Hannah had learned was embarrassment. Admiral, I request permission to speak. Granted, Cadet Zoth. I wish to formally apologize to Student Kim, Zoth said, his voice carrying to every corner of the auditorium. I dismissed her capabilities based on species prejudice and my own arrogance. Her analysis demonstrates strategic insights that surpass Anything taught in our advanced courses? Other students in the audience began standing as well. Representatives from different species offered their own acknowledgments of Hana's work and their regret at underestimating human strategic abilities. Admiral Vex raised a scaled hand for attention. This analysis raises important questions about military education throughout the galaxy. If humans can perceive strategic patterns that our traditional approaches miss, we must consider how to integrate these different perspectives into our command structures. The Admiral turned to address Hana directly. Miss Kim, on behalf of the Galactic Military Academy, I offer you immediate admission to our Strategic Command Program. Furthermore, I extend an invitation for Earth to establish a permanent strategic advisory presence at this academy. The auditorium erupted in applause. Hana felt overwhelmed by the recognition, remembering her first day when she sat alone in the back row while her classmates dismissed human military capabilities. "Thank you, Admiral," she replied. "I accept both offers. But I hope this represents not just recognition for my work, but understanding that diverse perspectives make all of us stronger strategists." After the formal presentation ended, Hana found herself surrounded by officers and students wanting to discuss her methods. They asked detailed questions about human pattern recognition, intuitive analysis, and the cognitive approaches that allowed her to see connections others had missed. Zoth approached during a break in the discussions. "Kim, I have learned something important today. Intelligence is not about processing power or computational speed. It is about seeing the same information from different angles." "Thank you, Zoth," Hana replied. "I learned something too. Individual brilliance is less important than collaboration between different ways of thinking." Professor Krell joined their conversation, its multiple eyes bright with satisfaction. "Miss Kim, your success validates the Academy's decision to diversify our student population. We have invited applications from 17 additional species based on the results of your analysis." "That is wonderful, Professor," Hana said. "Every species probably has unique cognitive advantages that could contribute to strategic understanding." Later that evening, Hana returned to her room and activated a communication channel to Earth. Gino's face appeared on her screen, grinning broadly. "I saw the news feeds from the Academy," he said excitedly. "You are famous across half the galaxy. Earth Military Command is already requesting your analysis methods for training our own officers." "It feels strange," Hana admitted. 3 months ago, no one thought humans had anything to contribute to galactic military science. Now they want us to help teach strategy to other species. "You proved that being different is not a weakness," Gino said. "Human intuition and pattern recognition are just as valuable as alien computational power or logical analysis." After their conversation ended, Hana looked out her window at the stars. Earth was somewhere out there among those distant lights. No longer the primitive world on the galactic frontier, but a recognized contributor to military knowledge. Her tablet chimed with an incoming message. She opened it to find a communication from Earth Military Command, marked with the highest security classifications. "Student Kim, we have detected unusual fleet movements at the galaxy's edge. Initial analysis suggests a new potential threat from unknown forces. Your assistance is requested for strategic evaluation of this situation. Please report to Earth Strategic Command immediately upon completion of your current semester." Hana read the message twice, feeling the weight of new responsibility. The quiet observer who had sat in the back row had become humanity's strategic voice among the stars. But more than that, she had helped prove that the galaxy's challenges required cooperation between different types of minds. She began composing her reply to Earth Command, already thinking about how human strategic analysis could be combined with alien technological capabilities to address whatever new threat awaited at the galaxy's edge. The Centauri conflict had been solved, but Hana Kim's real work was just beginning. She had found her place not just at the Academy, but in the larger tapestry of galactic civilization. The human girl who had recreated 847 hours of war in her mind would now help shape the future of military strategy across the stars as she worked on her reply. Other students passed by her window, heading to study groups and social gatherings. But for the first time since arriving at the academy, Hannah did not feel isolated. She was part of something larger now, a community of minds working together to understand the complexities of warfare and peace among the stars. The back row had taught her to observe and understand. Now it was time to lead.